So we have three main presenters today for you. We have Davis Kessler, who is head of our cyber proposition here at Travellers Europe. We also have Kathleen Clarges, who is a cyber security consultant from our partners at Symantec. And last but not least, we have Tony Kibble, who is the Director of Cybersecurity within Travellers Operations in Europe. So unlike me, our panel are all experts in their field of cyber and cyber risk. And in a moment, I'm going to pass you over to Davis to start the webinar. But first, just some quick pieces of housekeeping. Obviously, this is a Zoom webinar. We will be recording the webinar today, but don't worry, it's only the speakers and the presentation itself that are being recorded. All cameras are off, so we can't see you. So hopefully you can see us and the presentation in front of you. We also won't be able to hear you as all of your microphones are muted as well. But if you do have any questions as we go, please do feel free to submit them using the Q&A box that you should see at the bottom of your screen. And we'll try to answer them as we go or at the end. You should see that if someone asks a question, you do have the ability to upvote or like that particular question. It gives us the opportunity to see if that question is popular. And finally, we have a few polls that will pop up on your screens during the session. So please do get involved and put your answers on the polls as they appear on the screen. So let's get straight to it and begin. Davis, over to you.
All right, thanks, James. So I just first want to say again, thanks for everyone joining. This is a follow-on to the first webinar that we did, which was kind of a 101 on selling cyber. I think a lot of you were probably on that. If you didn't see it, it is saved online. We have it a recording saved, so you can check that out. Just let us know. We had really good feedback from that session, so we thought we'd build another series of webinars, this time focusing a bit more in-depth on particular issues. And so timely, this first one we were going to look at working from home, what that might mean in the cyber space, and what returning to the office may look like. Yeah, just a disclaimer. Anything we say today doesn't guarantee that coverage will apply. You know, this is not meant to be a discussion on our cyber policy. We really are here today to talk about the concerns that working from home has and give you a bit of advice on that. But the usual. Just in terms of agenda, yeah. So again, we're here to talk about the cyber exposures that working from home may bring. I think, you know, that's something that a lot of people probably don't think about, but when you think about our home working environments connecting to our own Wi-Fi, you know, I think it's safe to say that despite different companies being at different stages of their own cybersecurity posture, everyone's working from home environment is going to be less secure across the board than the more vetted and protected corporate networks. So you know, what does that mean to you and your clients? And that's what we're going to look at today. So first, we'll take a look at what some of those exposures are and how they are being exploited. We have some evidence. It's not just theory at this point. There is actual proof that working from home does raise certain cyber concerns. Then we'll transition into a discussion on what firms can do to protect themselves, both now and as we start to trickle back into the office. On that section, I'm happy to say that we do have Tony from our own cybersecurity team. Travellers is going through this just like anyone else. So happy to have Tony here to give a bit of flavor around what we're doing to meet those concerns. And then we'll close by mentioning some of the unique features that our Travellers proposition brings to our insureds and how that can overlap with protecting yourselves during these times. So on to the first poll here. You should see something pop up. So this is just your own experience during lockdown. Have you used any business device? So your laptop, a business mobile phone, for example, to access any of the items below? And let's all be honest.
Yeah, so if everyone can join this poll, we'll close it in a second and share the results for everybody. That's nearly just over half of you have voted already, and we'll stop it now just to share the results with you. There we are, Davis. Should we be able to see those? And everybody else?
Yeah, not really surprising. I think non-working related websites, we're all guilty of that. All of the above, a fair number. Few of you saying none of the above. Good for you. You're paying attention. You're reading the emails that your own IT team is undoubtedly sending to you and following that. But I think it's safe to say all of us have used our corporate devices for some non-working related things, and that can really raise some vulnerabilities that can be exploited, and Kath is here to really talk about that. So we'll move into the first section here. What is the risk? So Kath, with that, I'll hand it over to you and talk about some of the risks that can manifest themselves on these devices, on our home networks, etc.
Thank you. So the first area of the rising risk is the personal device usage. I think most of us will remember the BYOD explosion of the previous decade. And during that time, enterprises became aware that there were some blurring responsibilities around acceptable use policies and specifically privacy concerns where those particular devices were monitored. So we have some experience in the difficulties of personal device usage with business interactions, but the bottom line is, as was said in the introduction, that your local network, your home network, is inherently less secure than your corporate network, and your personal device won't have the same security configurations applied to it. It won't have those guardrails that a security configuration provided by a reasonably expert cyber organization will provide to you. So your device is less secure than potentially a business device. The next, obviously, is the personal use of company devices. We've just seen in the poll that people do use their corporate devices for some personal use. And as soon as you start entering the social media or going to sort of non-work related websites, then again, that threat vector is increased. Then there's the collaboration tools. So very often organizations will employ MFA or multi-factor authentication to enable access to those collaboration tools. But not all of those tools are MFA compliant. Not all of them demand it. It might be an option that you can take advantage of if possible. But if it's not mandated, then there are obviously ways around it. So the collaboration tools have been a particular target of attackers, specifically looking to sort of tenant leaks and so on. So that's something to be concerned about. And the final piece would be the relaxation in cyber hygiene that employees may feel at home. They're in the comfort of their own home. They may not lock their devices as they leave the room. They're working in shared environments. And you don't have the sort of array of cyber awareness sort of updates and so on that you might find in the office. And if, for example, in the office you were to do something like leave your workstation unlocked, a team member would very probably remind you to lock that. So you don't have the same oversight that you do perhaps have in the office while you're at home in your own comfort. So it's again something to be aware of. It's a cultural change in that aspect.
So let's
Kath,
have another.
I was just going to ask Kath a question here, James.
Yep, go for
In
it.
terms of file sharing, for example, in the office we may have been on an intranet where documents can be, looking at the collaboration piece, documents can be worked on and looked at by multiple people, but still be protected by that network. But now maybe we're emailing documents more often and using various non-protected or less protected file sharing methods. Is that something that you've seen as well?
Absolutely. The rise in labeling and classification has actually helped us a good deal with that, where a nice integrated DLP solution will recognize a confidential piece of information and may encrypt it based on the policy that's defined. So that there are some levels of protection that we can offer in that area. But where those things don't exist, then you will very often see internal documentation sent to personal Gmail addresses, and wow.
Yeah, I've tested out our own document retention policy by emailing myself a document to Gmail once, and luckily our system, Tony was on the ball, our system caught it and got that flagged up. It was just a test. Anyway, moving on to a poll. So this is no tricky question here, just out of curiosity, wondering how many of your own clients are returning to the office. What are you hearing?
Obviously, this is a live topic with different government announcements recently, but thank you for most of you who are polling. I'm going to stop it in a second once we reach about 70%, which is about now. So I'm just going to share this with you guys.
Okay, so yeah, spiking at about half. So a good amount of people are starting to return to the office. So one of the things that we'll hit on is how that could potentially bring some perils with it, as well as people bring these devices that have been on unprotected networks or your own home Wi-Fi, etc. Maybe you're using your own personal device. As we bring those back to the office and plug into the corporate network, are we going to be bringing some vulnerabilities with that? So what are we seeing? Are we seeing that these risks are manifesting themselves? And the answer is yes. So if you want to just click over to the next slide. This first one, this is a report by BitSight, which is another partner to Travelers. BitSight is a cybersecurity intelligence company. Back towards the beginning of lockdown, they ran a test comparing home working networks, and that's actual home networks used for working purposes, not just every home network. So comparing home working networks versus corporate networks, and looked at the percentage of malware infiltration on each. On the graph to the right, you don't really need to study it in detail, but it's split into two halves, with home networks on the top and corporate networks on the bottom. And you can see the dots are the frequency at which, compared to each other, they found certain types of malware. And the results, not surprisingly, but quite definitively, show that home working networks were much more exposed than corporate networks. Kind of a no-brainer, but it really is surprising how much. Their study found that home networks were 3.5 times more likely to be hit with certain strains of malware that are concerning than the corporate networks. And for some of those really key ones that are highlighted, that we're particularly concerned about these days, it was upwards of 5 times as likely to be infected than a corporate network. To put it another way, the study found that 45% of home working networks were infected with at least one of these types of malware. So it just goes to show that it's not just theory. It really is playing out that working from home does bring this exposure. So, Kath, why don't you talk about what you're seeing and how this is playing out from what Symantec is dealing with?
Well, we've been tracking a couple of quite interesting campaigns recently. It seems that as the lockdown lifted, the malware increased as well. So a couple of the interesting ones from May and June saw a 74.6% increase in Cobalt Strike. So that's a multi-purpose commodity available to purchase piece of malware. And when I say multi-purpose, it's like a Swiss Army knife. It can do a whole bunch of things, and then it can be used to do a whole bunch of things for something else. And commodity means it's freely available and it's relatively inexpensive. So that's been on the rise over sort of May and June particularly, and that was the particular front door, if you like, for Wasted Locker ransomware. In addition to that, we've been looking at LockyBot. So that saw a spike in activity in June, and actually that's gone up by 800%, our detections of LockyBot. So there are some significant spikes, and there are some trends around the types of attack that our cyber criminals are using. So if we look at the overview of the breach, sorry, if you'd like to just return back.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. So there's some sort of key commentary that's coming out of most of our security partners now. So it's not if, but when. So the whole idea is around building cyber resilience, understanding your key workloads and ensuring that your business continuity is ensured by having prevention and restoration techniques available for your key workloads. So across the past year, you'll see that most of the organizations have had some form of intrusion. And if we look at the breakdown of the types of intrusion experience, we can see malware right at the very top. So very often phishing will be your entry point, malware will be the sort of next destination, and then you might, using these polymorphic or sort of Swiss Army knife style attacks, then spout into the various other types of intrusion that we note there. Also, I think of note is the insider breaches, the well-intentioned and bad actor. So bad actors are obviously trying to, maliciously exfiltrate data, and it might be because they have a grievance against the organization. With the rise in redundancies and so on, you can imagine that threat vector will only increase. But also the well-intentioned insider. So this is a person that's working around process simply to try and get their job done. And when they don't have those guardrails of the corporate environment, they may have taken some risks, and those risks might not be truly understood. And again, if we look at the impact to the organizations of these breaches, operational outage and brand degradation tend to be the key things that organizations are looking to. But I think the scary one is the physical safety at risk. That is something that we really do need to be a little bit more cognizant of. So if you'd like to move to the next slide, we've got a very, very simplistic overview of the types of attack. This is basically replicating the cyber kill chain in a very basic model, but it shows you we've got a number of sort of ways to initially access a particular device. So RDB brute force, where you use things like password, spray and praise, you find a vulnerable internet facing system, or you have poor application hygiene that allows you to gain access. And then you've got the sort of the credential thefts and the lateral movement. And then the persistence, I think, is quite interesting when we're looking from a sort of working at home to return to work. malware these days is just so clever that it understands the environment that it sits within. So we might all be aware that most of our kind of high-level anti-malware solutions will offer you things like virtual sandboxing, where it detonates payloads in virtual environments just to see what they might do, to see if they're problematic. The malware now understands whether it's on a lone remote work, or it'll understand whether it's going to sort of gain access to an enterprise network. So persistence, things will just lie idle until there is an opportunity for them to take some advantage of their new environment using a variety of payloads. But if we'd like to move to the next one, I think a lovely representation of this is the sort of standard phishing campaign that we might all be familiar with. So this is where an email is provided with an invoice, and it's trying to make itself attractive to the user. If we go to the next slide, and you can see here that when you open the Excel spreadsheet, it asks you if you want to enable the content, and it encourages you to do this by deliberately blurring the content so you can't actually see what it is that the Excel spreadsheet's trying to tell you. So users will enable the content, and in so doing, they will then automatically execute the DryDex download into the victim's machine. And if you'd like to go to the next one. So what is so interesting about DryDex? Well, it's a very, very clever little piece of malware. The first thing that it does is to set up a local function that operates as an exception handler. So that means that every other activity that it does that might cause a log event that might be seen by a SIEM or another kind of security solution, that is all prevented because its local function handles that event. So it's not written, and it's not providing any evidence for security solutions to understand that there's something problematic going on. So it gains access to the registry, it enumerates various keys, and then it passes back all of the system and user information to its C2 server. And it will carry on trying to send that back until a successful response is received. So it's, yeah, it's a clever little devil, that one.
But I think one thing you hit on here, Kath, that's important to keep in mind is that this very clever, very sophisticated software is highly commoditized. So there's actually a very small subset of the bad guys who are able to create this type of software. They then sell it quite cheap on the dark web, and then your more average criminal gangs who don't have nearly this much expertise can use that software, and they don't need to know how it works. They just need to know how to phish us. And well, they are good at creating phishing emails, getting us to click on it. You showed an invoice, but it could be an application sent to HR, a CV. You know, there's all sorts of ways that they get us to click. They really capture that our curiosity, right, and get us to click that enable content box, or whatever it may be in that situation.
You're absolutely right. The phishing is becoming more and more sophisticated. People are taking over mailboxes, and they're actually studying conversations. So they're building out the organization based on the conversations of the email box that they've compromised. And then they insert themselves into those conversations using legitimate language, branded emails, appropriate signatures. It takes a good deal of knowledge to really identify that those aren't genuine. So yeah, it's quite an interesting state of the nation. But building on the phishing campaigns, attackers typically want to gain access to high value credentials. And the way they do that is they have the beachhead, the patient zero, so the victim of the phishing attack. After that attack has been successful, they'll move laterally across the same tier workstations and compromise more hosts, gather more credentials. Upon success, they'll go to privilege escalation, so they'll then attach to typically unpatched servers. And as soon as they're able to do that, they then look to gain access to the domain controllers. So once you have control over the domain controllers, the environment is under your control. The difficulty here is that they're actually using legitimate credentials that they've harvested. So it's really difficult to understand what is legitimate activity and what is attacker activity. So it's that kind of shared state where you have it's just really difficult to understand who's doing what. So that's exactly what they're after. Those are known as sort of golden ticket attacks. And when you've been successful in golden ticket, then the price of restoration can be very high.
Okay, we're going to move over to another poll now. But just before I do, there's one or two attendees that raised their hand during the presentation. If you want to send a question through and using the Q&A function, we'll be happy to look at that for you. But if we can now do another poll, which should be appearing on your screen now.
Yeah, so again, this is really just curiosity. What are you seeing as the main cyber concerns for your clients? What are you hearing? What are they telling you? So go ahead and.
So we've got about 40% of you voted so far. We'll hit 60 and then we'll stop. So it's just about now. So it's most of you. So I'm just going to end the poll and share the results. There we are.
Okay. Yeah. Split between the sophistication of the attacks, which again, as we just discussed, it's widely available to pretty much anyone willing to pay a bit of money and then commit some cyber crime. Unfortunately, it doesn't take much talent to perpetuate this type of fraud. All you really need to do is focus on that phishing element and let the malware do its work. And then relaxed attitudes, again, I think going back to the first couple of slides that Kath was talking about, and employee complacency, trying to get around corners, take shortcuts, that well-intentioned employee breach is certainly a real thing, and it's a concern out there. So yeah, not surprised to see these poll results, but it just shows that there is some concern out there. But all's not lost. There are certain things that we can do, your clients can do, yourselves can do to shore up your cyber posture, both now while we are still in a working from home environment and as we return back to the office. So here, I'm happy to say we have Tony Kibble from our own cybersecurity team to talk just a bit high level at what Travelers is doing.
Hi everyone. This is a bit unfamiliar territory for me. I'm normally stuck in a dark room with just the light of my screen illuminating me. At Travelers, we have the luxury of a mature security posture driven by a lot of investment as well over the years. And we have a large suite of tools that generally keep both our systems and our data safe. A few years ago, we made the conscious decision for business continuity reasons, for situations such as this, to equip all staff with their own laptop for working from home. And this meant we had no concerns about the transition from everyone working in the office to working from home, which we did pretty much successfully overnight, and nor do we have any real concerns about any shift to transitioning back to working in the office. A lot of that is driven by the fact that we utilize an always-on VPN on our devices, so that all traffic that we generate from our laptops while we're working is encrypted through a tunnel to be managed by our own network protections. And if you turn off the VPN, you can't access the internet. So you've literally got a dead terminal. So that helps us with a load of protections that way. Corporate wise, I mean, we have firewalls on every single ingoing and outgoing network area. We have intrusion protection, intrusion detection, to monitor for suspicious traffic and to block it if we detect anything trying to get in, and data loss protection as well, so that if anyone tries to send out too much of a certain type of data to an email address we don't recognize, it gets quarantined until we can release it after being told whether or not it's legitimate or not. Other things that we do to help protect our data is all our laptops have full disk encryption turned on. This means that if the laptop gets stolen or is lost, if the person doesn't have the credentials to get on, they are unable to then sideload the hard drive into something else to get the data off it. This is pretty vital, to be honest. And most important of all, we have a very strong documented security policies, so all staff know what they can and cannot do and what is expected of them during or whilst they're using corporate equipment. So what can small and medium businesses do going forward? Whilst we are a large international company, some of the protections we've got can be translated down to those small and medium sized companies for little or no cost, and can be implemented quite quickly if not already applicable to the business. Especially if return to work at the moment may be temporary and we're all locked down again, or as what we're seeing is there's a larger mix of working from home and working from the office. So home for 2 days, office 3 days. So there's always going to be a movement of devices during that time. Again, as I said, documented security policy. This ensures that all staff know exactly what is expected of them. That is half the battle. Okay. Always ensure the use of strong passwords. Password 123. Make sure that sort of password isn't allowed to be used. Make it 8 characters or more with complexity. Okay, and ensure that the staff do not store those credentials with the laptop, so that if the laptop gets stolen, then whoever's got it has got a route into the laptop. Where possible, especially with the VPNs, use 2-factor authentication. So not only do you have to use the password, you have to have an extra token, be it a hardware token or through an authentication app on your mobile phone. Always ensure that the firewall, the local laptop firewalls, HIPs, host intrusion protection systems, and antivirus is switched on, is configured correctly and kept up to date. I will also say is if there's a lot, if a company has had a lot of laptops, especially standalone ones at home, and they're bringing them back into the office, make sure that the antivirus is made up to date as soon as possible, and a full scan is done on that laptop before, ideally before they're allowed back onto the network. That isn't always feasible, but try and get that done as quickly as possible. I've already mentioned about full disk encryption. If they have corporate phones or laptops, possibly enable remote lock and wipe of mobile devices. That would incur a cost, so that may not be feasible for all small businesses. New vulnerabilities that are announced by Microsoft and other vendors, these are the commonest ways of malicious actors of accessing systems. So that's why Microsoft and all these vendors issue updates regularly on a monthly basis. So make sure those updates are installed. So patch continuously every month, make it a schedule. It can be automated. Microsoft has WSUS, which is a software update thingy, software update application, can be installed on a server for free. You can point your laptops to it, or you can configure them to go straight to Windows Update and download the latest updates and reboot. If you can, block USB ports so data can't be copied off. If you can't do that, try and implement a DLP policy so that people have difficulty sending what they shouldn't be sending or trying to copy off at any point. Basic security of never leave a device unattended. If you have to leave it unattended, especially in your car, try and leave it out of sight in the boot. And if you're in a public place, always lock it each time you walk away. If you do that, then if they don't have the password, then it's pretty much a dead box to them anyway. Try and eliminate or reduce having local administrator access on your laptops. Everyone tends to create their account with the highest rights available on the device. If they do that, then if you get malware, then it can install anything it likes. If you reduce the local admin, or if you eliminate local admin, then you can't install something. That hamstrings the virus almost immediately. Have a list of approved software that can be used. Don't allow your staff to just download willy-nilly from anywhere on the internet software they think is going to help them. These are the places where they're going to get sent to a website which looks like it might have the application they want, but it's going to be a dodgy copy of it, which may have had malware inserted into it. So ensure that they can only use approved software and preferably have a repository for that. And last but not least, back up all important data. Especially with GDPR, if you're hit with a ransomware and that data gets exfiltrated and or is not made available to the customer, you're going to be in a world of hurt. If you've got a backup of that data, the ransomware, as annoying as it is, can be cleaned up, the data restored back, and you're back to where you were. That can be an absolute business saver if you end up being out of business for a few weeks while you try and clean this up.
Brilliant. That's
end of the lesson.
James, can you just click back to that page real quick?
Sure.
Tony, one of the questions we asked, this was all really good stuff, and I think, again, to emphasize, a lot of this stuff is cheap or even free to implement. One of the questions we ask when offering cyber insurance is about encryption on mobile devices, so laptops and phones, business phones or personal devices used for business purposes. And I think that encryption on phones in particular always raises a lot of questions. That's probably the most frequent question we get in response to our proposal form. Can you just mention what encryption on your phone looks like and how it can be implemented?
Generally, with your mobile phone, if you insert a passcode, if you set it up so it has to have a passcode, that generally then makes it encrypted.
And would that apply to both Apple and Android devices?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Because then
is that?
It's easy as that, yeah. And then if anyone tries to sideload it, unless they've got that pin, they can't get access to it. Okay.
Well, that's a much easier answer than I've always given, so I'm going to use that in the future. All right. So thanks again, Tony, for that, and we will have time at the end for questions. But now, Kath, hand it back over to you and talk about some of the things that Symantec would recommend as well.
Thank you. So we always encourage all of our customers to try and raise the cost of an attack, to try and make yourselves less attractive to those adversaries. And the simplest way of doing that is to really double down on critical hygiene. So we understand that, you know, budgets for cyber haven't always been front and center as perhaps they are now. So, you know, thankfully we're able to sort of have a seat at the table with our business leaders now, and they are looking at cyber as a business interest as opposed to an IT interest. But for decades, we've had a whole bunch of really useful information around the critical standards, the actions and the activities that you should set on your devices and within your environment. But not all of those have been implemented. And then we have the new elements, which is a sort of credential theft. So that's requiring some net new mitigations. So typically you might look to have dedicated admin workstations, and sort of just-in-time privileged access account management with bolting of passwords and session recording and so on. But the sort of ransomware has increased the priority of backups, and simple things, simple measures like permissioning files, reducing those open shares will raise the cost of an attack. It becomes more difficult for an adversary to take advantage of that situation. And again, increased priority, patching, and retiring our old protocols. So ensuring that, our TLS is at 1.2 or higher, making sure that our certificates, where expired, are revoked. So all the basics, all the simple stuff that an organization should have been doing for decades has become more and more important in this new world that we have. And over the sort of last year or so, crypto mining took a dive because the cryptocurrencies themselves were worth less. But increasingly over the last couple of months, you can see the cost of crypto increasing. So we are looking now to sort of try and secure up those web-facing infrastructure, put in some performance monitoring. As you'll appreciate, cyber detection and response is all around anomaly identification. So when we talk about the new normal, the move from the corporate environment to the remote working generated a new normal that the cyber guys had to baseline. And they've now been able to do that, and they'll have baseline back with the sort of hybrid working environment that I think we're all going to be seeing for the next 6 to 12 months at least. But the key shout out here would be that the monetization of these attacks is simply just reshuffling the priorities of the same old hygiene debt. So if you look to do the basics well, and then look for securing yourselves against things like credential theft, you'll be in a pretty good shape.
Sorry, just going to go back a couple. There we are. So Davis, this was yours, I think.
Oh, actually, it was mine. So again, we were going to talk about those sort of critical capabilities when you are looking to return, a workforce back into the working environment. So, as I think has been mentioned before, the inventory and the update. So, understanding what potentially rogue applications have been installed and eliminate them, and update your AV, your signatures, and all of your kind of security policy settings on a device, ideally in a segregated network, before you allow it access to potentially your trusted network. Review those business continuity plans, identify those critical assets, those critical workloads, and make sure that you have resilience in place for those. The increasing security complexity has led us to, I think, arrive at consensus that a fabric solution for your security identification, detection and response is probably the best way to go. What that does is it aggregates a whole bunch of signals from various sources. It aggregates those into events. Those events are aggregated into alerts, and that offers your cyber triage team a prioritized list of things to work through. Very often where those alerts are modeled, you can then write in automated remediation. So where it sees a set of circumstances, a set of attributes, indicators of compromise, it can then take a workflowed approach to remediate that automatically. So that's lovely. where we look at some sort of traditional technologies. Network access control is like a forerunner to zero trust. So the key thing that NAC offers you is visibility. Again, where you can pass that visibility, those events, into a nice fabric solution, you can start to build a picture of the activities and potential malicious activities that are occurring. And there's more emerging technology side of things. We have the sort of EDR, NDR, XDR. So endpoint detection and response, network detection and response, and X kind of is everything detection and response. So those are some, really, really sophisticated pieces of software, particularly that have machine learning, AI, a whole bunch of threat intelligence from things like global intelligence networks that will kind of offer you campaign guidance and modes to remediation. So there's some really exciting tech going on. However, if the exciting tech isn't necessarily a business priority, do the basics well. And the next slide. So as I mentioned, most organizations are on the journey towards zero trust. So zero trust has basically turned the whole networking on its head. If you look at the origins of computer networks, they were set up to enable, sharing and collaboration of information. So kind of free access to stuff. And then permissions started to be applied and accounts and rights and so on. But we've now kind of gone to the other end of the spectrum, where zero trust says that what we have to do is verify and then trust. So we verify that the entity, be it the user, the process, the device that is asking to access something is in fact the person they claim to be, or the entity they claim to be, and they are approved and authorized to do just that. So it's an interesting evolution of the network philosophy, if you like. But again, risk mitigation steps, do the basics, and as you make your journey towards zero trust.
All right, and then for this last section, we're going to focus on some of the tools that Travelers makes available to our insureds to help them along this process. So, a lot of what we discussed today, it was IT heavy. I'm not an IT expert. Most of you on the phone probably aren't either. But one of the things that we make available to our insureds when they buy a CyberRisk policy or our tech policy are various resources, many of which are through Symantec. And one of those that I think is particularly helpful, none of these were created with lockdown in mind, of course. This is to improve the cybersecurity posture of our insureds, just generally across the board, right? But a lot of it could be really relevant to lockdown. So again, there's a lot of IT topics that our insureds can discuss with a professional like Kathleen at Symantec via the helpline. So we recommend that all of our insureds take advantage of the cyber resiliency assessment and then have that discussion. That's a chance to have a free hour with that cybersecurity professional to ask questions like this. How do we protect ourselves? We're concerned about employees who've been working remotely, going back to the office. What can we do? Questions like that are perfectly fine to ask on that helpline. And then one thing Tony mentioned, the half the battle is you and me. It's employees. It's training. It's making sure we don't do stupid things, right? And so one of the probably the best tool available through the partnership with Symantec is the cloud-based learning management system. So it's a series of modules that employees can take, and we'll talk about things like phishing, recognizing these schemes, and password management, and things of that nature that you and me and all the other employees can help protect our own companies. And then one thing that I don't normally focus on when I'm talking about Symantec, but we do have available are some discounts to various services and products that Symantec offers. And one of those that has been mentioned is endpoint detection and protection. So Kath, do you want to quickly mention what that is and how it could help, particularly in light of a lockdown or return to office scenario?
Well, it's a suite of capabilities in a nice lightweight agent with a single console and so on, that basically aims to protect your endpoint fleet. It's got some really lovely capabilities with things like reputational lookups, sandbox detonation, attack surface reduction. It does some really, really good stuff. But it gives you confidence that, when configured correctly, your endpoints really are quite secure.
I've heard it called antivirus plus as a really dumbed down way of saying it, but is that basically accurate?
Basically, yeah.
Great. Any other comments before we address questions from you, Kathleen or Tony?
I think you're focusing really on the acceptable use. The policy is really, really important, and keeping those that content fresh. I think that the cybersecurity awareness offerings that we have really are, bite-sized. They're consumable, but they're kind of interesting too. So it doesn't feel like a chore sitting through the training. You actually do feel like you've learned something in a few minutes. It's a really good use of time.
Kathleen, I do remember you saying something when we was preparing for this, that a lot of businesses have turned things off to enable working from home, and it's the reliance on making sure they turn things back on again in the return to office. That's sort of a layman's sort of simplistic view, but that sort of struck a chord with me, which is sort of what you've gone through today in detail.
Yeah, absolutely. So cyber risk is all around balancing the risk against the productivity, and so decisions need to be made. Where is the risk? How risky is that? And sometimes, for the sake of productivity, people will take decisions to disable security guardrails, safeguards, to enable some collaboration or communication or something of that nature. I mean, very often you'll see that you have sort of attribute-aware conditional access, and one of those attributes is the device is internal. You'll have to turn that off where you've got a remote workforce. So typically a workload that was always done on-prem because it was, risky or secure or confidential or something of that nature, has some conditional access attached to it, but that conditional access had to be broken by virtue of the geo change.
So we do have a few questions in. One is, if we do use remote access, how should it be protected? I think Tony hit on this. Use of a VPN creates an encrypted tunnel between the remote device and the corporate network. So hopefully, I think that question came in a while ago, so hopefully that answered that question. In the chat box, we have somebody asking what our average cyber claim costs were for 2019 and the trends. So I don't want to take up too much time. We do have the first webinar that we did, the Selling 101, does have a section on what we've seen, the trends. Sneak preview, it's ransomware and social engineering fraud. So that's really driving the claims. Can't give specific numbers, as I hope you can imagine, but in terms of the average claims that resulted in an actual covered loss, we're looking in excess of 100K a lot of the time, particularly if there's a data breach and you need to bring in attorneys, solicitors. You need to provide notification, get in touch with the ICO. Those costs add up quick. So, and then ransomware itself, of course, if that has hit the insured's computers, those demands are skyrocketing. Again, we've got some materials on the other presentation there, but the average ransomware demand is well over, I think it's now about 170,000 US dollars, typically in Bitcoin, one of the latest studies I've seen. How do home workers check that they have adequate protection for their home networks, and what are minimum procedures and standards to reduce the risk? Yeah, I mean, we talked about how home networks can be a vulnerability, but I guess we didn't really mention what can be done on the home network. So Tony or Kath, what is there anything that a lay person like me and the attendees here who aren't IT experts can do to increase our protection?
Working on the basis that they're saying that they're using a corporate device on their home network, then if there isn't a VPN to encrypt the traffic directly into the corporate network, then always make sure that the third party, if that's what you've got installed, or the inbuilt Microsoft one, firewall and antivirus is switched on and used. Don't let anyone else in the house use that device if needs be.
I was going to say, don't let anyone in the
house. Only use it for business if you can, and try and reduce the non-working usage of that device as much as possible.
Yeah, so you're talking about, the reduction, really consider your Ring doorbells, your IoT fridges, make sure that if you are going to have some IoT sharing your home network, that IoT can in fact be patched. Not all of it can.
Yeah, and one thing I've heard, and I'm curious if this rings true, is just resetting your Wi-Fi every now and then, turning it off and then turning it back on will upload any firmware patches to that router. Is that a fallacy, or does that have some truth behind it?
Judging by the way what Virgin do to my router, they just do it at random times. You don't have to turn it off and back on again. They do it themselves.
Okay. not intentionally. Yeah.
And they
if it is working.
and they wipe my Wi-Fi SID as well, so it goes back to default. So I have to set everything back up again. But yeah.
The joys of home working and internet outages and the like.
We've got another question that Eamon sort of put there first, which is just
yeah, Eamon, that's a very specific question. In terms of premium, I'd have to give that some thought. So I'm happy to get in touch with you separately. But in terms of the first part of the question, which an oil distribution client, any particular concerns, Kath, Tony, any thoughts on that question from Eamon?
GDPR.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if you have customers.
That is the 4 letters you need for that sort of thing.
Yeah,
I think that it probably ties into sort of what we did on the first webinar. How do we introduce the concept of cyber insurance, the need for cyber insurance? We've got some info on there, and that sort of also covers off Ian's question about you in the previous webinar. What we do after this presentation, we can send a link round to both this recorded session and also the previous recorded session, so you've got access to that. Does that make sense, guys?
Great, yeah. And certainly any questions that you didn't think of right now, feel free to get in touch with me or someone from our team, and we'd be happy to have a discussion. So we are at the end of the hour, and so
We are.
yeah.
So basically, thank you everybody for joining this session. We hope you got something out of it. There were obviously it's quite tech heavy. We have to get sort of tech heavy on some of the terminology. And thank you for Kath, Tony, and Davis for being our esteemed panel. If you've got any further questions on the screen here, you'll see details of Davis's team. We've got Lisa and Eve, who are the underwriting team and our cyber team. And in addition to that, your main contact for travellers, all products and services with travellers should be your regional distribution manager or your usual contact in wherever you are in the UK or Ireland. They're all on the screen now. We've got one quick question that we probably will try and answer on the screen now. I don't know if you guys can see that, Tony and Davis, but if we're finished with that last question.
Yeah, I was just typing a response to that one. If they pay,
do you want to read it out?
Okay, moving back to ransomware, I've read that over 50% are statistically paying their attackers to recover. Obviously, that's a business personal decision, but do they not then become known payers? Yes, they do. However, one would hope that once they've been bitten once, they would then improve their security posture to either reduce or eliminate that happening again. So therefore, they won't have to pay again.
And I think it's critical. You're not just paying, but you're also bringing in a appropriate IT forensics vendor who will make sure that you haven't just paid, but they're still there. That your devices, your endpoints are fully cleansed of that. But yeah, you are a known payer, so it is critical that you improve lessons learned from the first time.
Brilliant. Thank you for your questions. So I'll draw a close now to the webinar. It's 3 minutes past 12. We've overrun a little bit. So thank you once again for joining and enjoy the rest of your day. And don't forget to contact us for any further questions you may have after this. So thanks once again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.